Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, your moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have, as always, a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it on demand. We will be sending out an email today after today's presentation that includes a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time today during today's presentation you have a question for our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question. And we'll get to as many questions as we can near the end of today's presentation. And finally, we are giving away three $50 Amazon gift cards at the end of today's webinar. It'll be a random drawing, so please stick around. Hopefully we'll choose your name as one of our 3 lucky winners. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Hybrid CI/CD with Kubernetes and Codefresh. Really interesting stuff. Our speakers today are Kostas Kapolonis, who is a developer advocate at Codefresh, and Dan Garfield, who is the Chief Technology Evangelist at Codefresh. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're well.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So we're excited to get started. Just to introduce myself, I'm Dan Garfield. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist for Codefresh. I'm also a Google developer expert and a member of the Forbes Technology Council. And with me is Kostas.
Hello, my name is Kostis. I'm working as a developer advocate at Codefresh. I was originally a developer, and I love everything that has to do with unit testing, automation, clusters, Docker. I'm also one of the people that are writing blog posts for the Codefresh blog. So you can see on the screen some of the topics that are interesting to me. Feel free to check our blog if you're interested in them as well.
Now, today we're going to be talking about hybrid, and there's a very closely related topic, which is sort of multi-cloud deployment. We did a whole video on this. It's on codefresh.io/events. You're welcome to watch that if you're interested in deploying to multiple clusters at the same time. That's a sort of different topic. Today we're going to be talking more about CI/CD. And traditionally, the issue with CI/CD is when you need to have it get access to resources in a private network or in a private location. And this is what we're going to be talking about today for hybrid CI/CD. And the reason we're doing that is because CI/CD has a lot of components. It's actually not totally portable in the way that you would maybe love it to be, because there's authentication, there's secrets, there's all these things. And I see a lot of organizations struggle with this because they deploy maybe a full stack CI/CD into all the places that they need to deploy to, and that ends up being very resource intensive and not the best fit to solve the problem of accessing things behind the firewall or deploying behind the firewall, or a few other scenarios that we're going to talk about. So we're going to start off by just talking about continuous integration and delivery and kind of what it is. And why don't you take that, Kostas?
Yeah, so before we talk about hybrid CI/CD, we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page and talk about CI/CD. So CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment, or continuous delivery if you prefer. And it's actually the way companies are developing software. Continuous integration is the first part, where developers are creating the features, creating the branches, perform unit testing, maybe have code reviews. And then when everything is ready, a release is created, it's packaged, and it's ready to be deployed. And then the continuous deployment part is the next phase, where the artifact is sent to production. Now, if you look at the slide here, I have some stick figures, which is how things were supposed to work in the old times, where everything was manual. There was not enough automation. We had huge checklists for performing both the CI part and the CD part. And of course, we want to move away from manual steps. So one way to do this, and actually the best way to do this, is to have an automated pipeline, which is completely automated. It gets you from start to finish. You start from a basic code commit. You build your images, your containers, you run all your tests, your security testing, your quality testing, and then you store your image to a Docker registry or another artifact repository, and finally you push them to a cluster. And this is how things should work. You can see that there are no, let's say, stick figures in this chart. And in today's environment, you always want to push clusters and containers. So the pipeline should be Docker native. It should work with containers. Now, what we see in the graph is that actually we take it one step further, and each step in the pipeline is a Docker container. So each pipeline step on its own is running on a Docker container, so all the build nodes have only Docker installed and nothing else. And this is true for all the steps in the pipeline. So we are going to see a demo today of hybrid CI/CD with Codefresh. Codefresh, if you're not familiar with it, is a CI/CD solution with a very nice UI. It gives you everything you need for both CI and CD. So we cover both phases of the software life cycle. It also comes with its own private Docker registry. And if you're using Helm, it also includes a Helm repository, because we realize that developers want to work with a Docker registry. So we want to offer them everything they need in a single platform and in a single interface. For all these things, there are dashboards. So you get dashboards for your Docker registry, for your Helm repository, for your Kubernetes cluster, for your Helm releases. And because we also want to play well with operators, we have an API and a CLI. So people that don't like the UI can still work with Codefresh from their terminal. We have 20,000 users and hundreds of customers. Most of our customers come to us when they are fed up with other solutions and they say they don't want to maintain their CI/CD build nodes anymore. They want to have something simple, something quick, something that works out of the box. So initially with Codefresh, we started like most other companies. There is a client solution, which is very easy to use. You just create a free account. You can log in right away. Everything runs on us, like on Codefresh infrastructure. You don't need to do anything by yourself. So you just link it to your repository, which can exist on all the popular Git providers, such as GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. And then you set up your pipeline, you commit something, and the pipeline runs. And this is very handy for everybody, because there is nothing to maintain. There is nothing to host. Everything is managed by Codefresh. Now, of course, some companies want always an on-premise solution because they want to have full control of everything. And Codefresh also comes in an on-premise solution where the customer gets everything. We don't manage the infrastructure ourselves, but of course, we can help the customer with training or with some initial instructions on how to install it. Then Codefresh is installed on on-premise data center where everything is run behind the firewall, and it has access to all the secure services that are normally not on the cloud. So this is something that, let's say, big customers really like and want to work on. But today we are going to focus on the hybrid solution, which is in the middle, and it gets the best, let's say, of both worlds. Here we split Codefresh into two parts. We still manage all the UI and most of the platform, so we still maintain it ourselves. We automatically update it. The customer does not need to do anything about it. But the builds, like the pipelines, are actually running behind the firewall on the premises on the customer. So it looks like it's a single platform, but it's actually split into two parts. And the big advantage here is that the customer is only maintaining a small part of the platform, which, as we will see in the demo today, it's very easy to manage and run. The rest of the platform, let's say 90% of it, it's not managed by the customer, so they don't have to do anything about it. But all the pipelines have access to the private cloud or the private on-premise data center that the customer have. So it's something that gets the best of both worlds. You get the flexibility that you do not maintain it or the platform by yourself as a customer, but you also have access to all the secure services that you need. Now, initially, we thought that this would be interesting to only some of the companies, but it turns out that a lot of companies are looking in this idea of hybrid. First of all, there are companies that have very specific requirements, usually in the financial or health sector. So just for legislation purposes, they cannot get and use the cloud in a 100% manner. They have to keep some services behind the firewall, and they need to know that they are secure. And these are some of the companies that are actually will stay there forever. It's not that, you know, these companies are going to move to the cloud at some point and we only need to help them during the migration period. There will not be a migration period. They will stay on the on-premise environment at least in the foreseeable future because they need to do this. So some customers, you know, they need to use either the hybrid or the on-premise solution. There is no other choice for them. So for these companies, the first thing they want to protect is the source code. The source code is usually the most sensitive asset in an application, and it has to stay in behind the firewall at all times. It can never leave the premise, and it's considered, you know, one of the most, let's say, important things that we need to connect to. Usually customers have an on-premise installation of GitHub or GitLab or another server, so the hybrid solution needs to be able to check out code from those on-premise hosting providers. The second important piece of infrastructure is a Docker registry. If you work with containers today, you know that you need the Docker registry, and actually most companies have lots of Docker registries. First of all, there are images of multiple times. Usually companies have the images that they are deployed to production environments, but there are also the images that are used for tooling, maybe with scripts or help tools that are used within the pipeline itself, but they are not actually deployed on a production environment. And usually companies have a layer of Docker registries where there is let's say a development Docker registry where everything a developer does is automatically pushed there, and then once a Docker image is passing some certain tests or is deemed to be secured, it gets promoted to another Docker registry that contains secure images. And then maybe in the end, in some companies, there is also a public Docker registry where some Docker images may be pushed. So as a hybrid solution, we also need to take care of this pushing and pulling from a Docker registry that sits behind the firewall. And finally, we have the cluster itself where your application is deployed, which again, some companies are not going to go on the public cloud. They have a Kubernetes cluster, which is behind the firewall. So there is no access to it at all from the outside. It's not on a public cloud. Of course, there are, you know, clusters that are there because of a regulation, but there are also clusters that are used just for internal intranets, and they don't need to have public access. We finally have clusters where they are not always, you know, online at all times. So again, as a hybrid solution, we have the challenge of connecting to these clusters behind the firewall.
Yeah, in this example, what we've actually seen is a trend for Kubernetes clusters being embedded in storefronts. There are a number of different restaurant chains that are using Kubernetes clusters in each store. And then we're also seeing Kubernetes clusters embedded on things like ships, ironically, container ships. Of course, these have their own kind of unique challenges in keeping them updated, but hybrid is a great way to deal with these things because they have intermittent network access and they often have firewall challenges. And so this hybrid solution that we're talking about is perfect for these kinds of cases where you need to maintain infrastructure in hard to reach places. And in the case of the ship, having a way to deploy to that cluster, it doesn't have internet most of the time, or it doesn't have enough internet to actually do the kinds of updates it needs to do. So we're going to solve that using hybrid here.
So yes, we found out that lots of customers, like more than we expected, wanted the hybrid mode instead of in the on-premise mode because they wanted all these advantages. They wanted to use Kubernetes in order to gain all the scaling benefits that come from it, but they also wanted a solution that was secure for them. And they also didn't want to manage everything by themselves. So they were happy where they could only control part of the platform, the most, let's say, critical one, and then we, Codefresh, handle the rest of the UI. So how do we do this? We introduced a Codefresh hybrid runner designed specifically for this purpose. And the way it works is that, as you can see on this picture, we run everything, like 90% of the platform, and this includes the UI. This runs on the public cloud. It runs on Codefresh premises. Everything is there. Again, this is fully automated by us. All the upgrades are happen there by us, so the customer does not need to do anything about it. And then in the customer network behind the firewall, we just install a small Codefresh runner. It's a small agent which is running inside the cluster, and it's taking care of, let's say, the back end of the pipelines. It runs the non-graphical part of the pipeline.
Now, one of the cool things about that runner is because it's running within the context of that cluster, all of the networking, all of the resources that are within that that infrastructure that are behind that firewall are accessible, but they are not accessible to codefresh.io. So your code, for example, if it's pulled and built in the runner, in the Codefresh runner, that code doesn't go back to the codefresh.io SaaS. So you get that security benefit, but also you have that convenience of being able to work with things that are in a secure environment, and you don't have to take on a big management headache to do it.
Yeah, so this is the important point, actually, how communication happens between the runner and the Codefresh SaaS. First of all, as you can see from the arrow of the image, the communication is only outgoing. So the runner is contacting Codefresh and not the other way around. So as a customer, you don't need to open any firewall ports. This is a very well-known problem in security-sensitive companies where you want to do something and then you realize that you need to open your ports. And usually administrators do not like this. So in order to avoid this problem, the runner is actually communicating with the Codefresh SaaS, and it is responsible for opening the outgoing connection. There is no polling here where Codefresh is actually polling the runner. This is not happening. The communication is unidirectional. The other important topic here is also that the runner itself is running on a Kubernetes cluster, so it gains all the scaling advantages of Kubernetes. So if you have one build, you will get one, let's say, instance of the runner. If suddenly you have 50 builds, the runner will automatically scale and allow you to continue using your pipelines. Another important topic here is that the runner is fully independent. So as you will see in the demo, once you install it, you don't need to do anything about it. It's completely automated. It has some extra components that deal with volumes that are used in pipelines, and it connects to all the services that it needs to connect. It also downloads the Codefresh engine, like the component responsible for running the pipeline. And because that's a standard Kubernetes application, you don't need to do anything about it in order to monitor it in a special way. So if you have already a team that knows how to monitor Kubernetes applications and how to scale them and how to manage them, the runner is just another Kubernetes application that works in exactly the same manner as any other Kubernetes application. So instantly, you don't need anything special. All the Kubernetes knowledge that the company has can still be applied on the runner. And it's also very easy to upgrade. Finally, I also need to point out that maybe we'll see this in demo. It's not like a single agent. You can install multiple agents on multiple clusters. So you can mix and match your clouds that you might have or your on-premise data centers. First of all, just a small note, I'm going to show in the demo like the generic way where you can install the runner in your own cluster. But if you are particularly using a Google cluster, we are also at the marketplace right now in Google Marketplace. So you can just click on it and get the runner automatically in your cluster. But don't worry about this, because in the demo, we'll see a more generic way which installs on any cluster. So what's the end result out of all this? What do we gain? So once you install the runner inside Codefresh, as we'll see in the demo, you get a list of all your runtime environments. This is where you have runners installed. These environments, as we said before, can be any private cloud, any public cloud, or any private on-premise installation, and they don't have also to be connected all the time. So if one of these environments goes offline for some time, nothing bad will happen. And once you choose a pipeline to run, you can essentially instruct Codefresh and say, I want to run this pipeline on this particular environment. So maybe you have different pipelines with different, let's say, security requirements. So you can choose exactly where each pipeline will run. So this is, let's say, the most important slide of the whole presentation. The end result is that you get the same experience for every pipeline, regardless of where it's running. So behind the scenes, maybe the pipeline you're running is running on the public cloud or on the private cloud, but as a user, you don't really see that. All these pipelines are looking at exactly the exactly the same way as a developer. So maybe you have an operator which is responsible for the security of your installation, and he's setting up all the runners and the on-premise installations. But then when the developer comes in, you can just select where you want the pipeline to run, and then it runs like all other pipelines. There is nothing special for hybrid pipelines in the way they run. And again, you can mix and match. So maybe you have a super critical pipeline, which is very security sensitive, like the one on the lower right, which is, let's say, your main application. So you choose to run it in your on-premise data center. But then maybe you have another pipeline which is not security sensitive. Maybe it's something like an open source project or something non-critical. So you can run it on the Codefresh SaaS on the public cloud. And maybe you also have other public clouds that work in the same manner. All these can be configured per pipeline. And the other important topic also is that you also get access to all the different architectures that we support. So you can run, let's say, on the Linux public cloud that we offer by default. But if you have an ARM cluster, you can install a runner on your own ARM cluster and run pipelines there. Maybe you have Windows runners where you need to run Windows containers. The runner is also working on Windows, so you can run the runner there. And then not only you can mix and match different pipelines that are in different location and with a different security requirement, but also different pipelines, with a different architecture. We will also see in the demo a way where you can link pipelines together. So you can have, let's say, one pipeline that is running behind the firewall on your on-premise data center, and it's running on Windows. And then after it finishes, it kicks another pipeline, which is running on a different cloud or on the public cloud and in a different architecture. So it's very easy to connect multiple pipelines from different different types and of different locations, and have let's say, a master pipeline that you can create in exactly the manner that you want. So it's time for the demo. Let's say, praise to the demo gods, and we will see a hybrid solution. And just to make sure that we are working with a highly secure cluster, I'm actually going to use my laptop. So I have a Kubernetes cluster on my own laptop. It's behind, of course, the firewall of my Wi-Fi here. It's not public. There is no access to there from the outside. I'm going to install a runner there, and we are going to run Codefresh pipelines where the UI will still be on the cloud, on the public cloud of the Codefresh SaaS installation, but the actual pipelines will run locally on my laptop. Again, you can see from the arrow that always the communication is outgoing. So my laptop will actually open connections to the Codefresh SaaS. As a user, I don't need to open any special ports on my firewall. Everything is done by the runner. So demo time. Before we go into the demo, let's take a look at Codefresh. This is Codefresh, and the most important part before we start in the demo is if I go to the settings, and here I can go to my list of environments, runtime environments. You can see by default, I get only access to 3 environments. These are all offered by Codefresh. They are fully managed by Codefresh. They are on the public cloud, and you get them with your Codefresh account, depending on the level that you pay. So before I do anything, you can see I have 3 environments, and I can run a pipeline on any of them. Now, just to make things a bit faster, I have done some pre-installation steps on my laptop. First of all, I have downloaded the runner. The runner is a very simple thing to do to install it, because it's just a single executable. And I also have the Codefresh CLI installed, which is another single executable. I also have already set up authentication. So I have access to the Codefresh UI from the command line. So this way, when I install the runner automatically knows which Codefresh account it will link to. This is how the communication happens. I'm not going to pass authentication instructions to the runner. It's going to take them from the Codefresh CLI. So I have a Docker for desktop here cluster. So if you see, it's a very simple cluster. And at the moment, if I remember correctly, it's completely empty. So there is nothing magic going on. It's just a single cluster running on my own laptop. So I'm going to open my cheat sheet here. First of all, I'm going to create a namespace where I want to install the Codefresh runner, and then I'm going to run the magic command. So this is a single command that takes care of everything. So Venona that you can see is the name of the runner. The runner actually is an open source project. You can see it on GitHub. It's fully open source. We accept pull requests if you find problems or also issues. So this part of Codefresh is actually public. It's not like something magic. So if as a company you are worried about what is running on your cluster, you can just open the source and look at it, and you can verify on your own that what we say is true, that communication is always outgoing. We never send the source code to anywhere else and stuff like this. So I have here the install command. I'm selecting the namespace where I'm going to install it, and it's the namespace I just installed. And I'm also passing the kubeconfig of the local cluster that I'm running on, plus the configuration for the Codefresh authentication. So now the runner will do its magic. It's getting installed. As I said, it's fully automated. It's installing all the images that it needs, all the security accounts that it needs, everything that is needed for the runner. So installation completed successfully, and we can actually hit the monitoring here to see what happens. So this is the namespace where I just installed the runner, and you can see its components. By default, it starts with some components, and then later in the demo, when we'll run pipelines, we'll also see some extra components getting launched. Again, you can see here that there are components, for example, for the volumes. So all the volumes are automatically managed by the runner when they are needed in pipelines. I don't have to do anything about it. So now that I finished with the runner, if let's say I go back and go back to the screen that holds my runtime environments, back to my account settings. So now you can see after the installation, there is a new runtime environment, which is actually my laptop. You can see here the details of the cluster. This is the identification it takes, and it's still available. All the other environments are still available there. So now I'm ready. So the first demo we are going to see is just the basic build. I want to run a pipeline, and I want to run it on the hybrid solution. So the only thing I need to do is just go to my pipelines. I can choose any pipeline I want. Here I have created some pipelines specifically for this demo. So this is a basic build. Now, if you're not familiar with Codefresh pipelines, we use YAML to describe the pipeline. And this is a very simple pipeline where it has 4 stages. First, I check out the code from a code repository. Then I build a Docker image with a build step. Then I'm running some unit tests. And in this case, I'm using a Python example. So I run my Python test inside the Docker container. The contents of the pipeline are not really that important because, as we said, we don't really need to care about what happens with the pipeline. We need to just select what happens to it. So the magic thing here is that if I go to the settings, there is a setting for the environment, and I think it was already set to be on the private one. So even though I can select the public cloud for this pipeline, I'm saying that I want to run specifically on my laptop. So I'm pressing save, and then if I go back and run it, I'm being asked on what branch I'm going to use. It doesn't really matter for this demo. So now the pipeline starts, and it will actually take a lot of time because it's running on my laptop. So even though I'm looking at the UI that is running on the public cloud, this particular pipeline now is running on my own cluster on my laptop. The Codefresh runner is actually downloading the Codefresh engine behind the scenes. It will fetch all the build images, all the images that are required. It will run all the steps, and then it will open a connection back to the Codefresh UI, and it's going to report its progress. So this is
Now,
going to take some time.
what's happening when we hit that build button, and we can see the engine has started downloading here. What's happening when we hit that build button, it doesn't send a webhook to Costas's laptop, right? Because his laptop's sitting behind a firewall. It only has a connection with his own machine. There's no way for Codefresh to reach it. What's happening instead is the runner that's running on Costas's laptop is actually checking in with codefresh.io and then picking up any jobs that are available. And if Costas's laptop had been offline for the next few hours, that build basically would have just been pending and waiting for it to become available. So in the case of a, let's say a container ship that comes into port, it could have had a job sitting there and waiting for it. And as soon as it gets that internet connection, it'll check in and get all the jobs and actually start running those.
Yes, exactly. So by default, if you don't do anything special, the runner is actually checking every 5 seconds if something is pending, but this is something that as an administrator you can change. So you can make it longer or shorter depending on your needs. So the pipeline has finished. And as you can see from the UI, there is nothing special happening. It's just another pipeline where I can click on any of the steps, see what happened. And all these are coming from my own laptop. So that's, let's say, the most basic scenario. Now, if we go and see another pipeline, we can go and look at another demo. So this was the basic build. The second demo I'm going to show is access to resources. Remember, we said that one of the most, let's say, critical reasons so why you need a Codefresh runner is because you want to access things that are behind the firewall that are not usually public. Now, I don't have another cluster here that is running on my laptop, but I'm going to do something different. So I have also connected to Codefresh some clusters already. So in this case, they are public, but they could be anywhere. And the authentication is happening in Codefresh. So I've gone in the Codefresh UI and set up all the authentication. And automatically, without any configuration at all, if you run a Codefresh pipeline and you use, let's say, the kubectl image, which is the classic command, you get access to all the contexts that are linked to the Codefresh account. So if you look at this pipeline, it just has a simple step, like a single step, where I'm just running kubectl commands right away. There is no authentication here for kubectl. The authentication is set up for Codefresh on my account. So I'm going to run this pipeline, and again, I'm going to select and put it on my own laptop, and it will run just fine. So as we run it, you will see the context is being printed out, even though my laptop has no knowledge of these clusters. So my laptop, again, you didn't see, you saw I didn't do anything special regarding authentication on my laptop, but the pipeline will run locally and it will still access all those clusters. So here in this example, I'm just running kubectl, but you can imagine I could run kubectl apply and actually install something on the cluster. So you can have a hybrid pipeline where the pipeline is installing applications on a different cluster, which may be running on a public cloud or on a private cloud, and authentication is taken care of all by Codefresh. You don't need to do anything special about it. So if we look at the build, you can see here that my laptop has access to the clusters that I have set up just by running kubectl. And here I had some examples where I'm printing the nodes and the services. And then the final thing I'm going to show is, if you remember, we talked about linking of pipelines. So you can start a pipeline, let's say, from your on-premise environment, and then once it finishes, you can start another pipeline which is running on a different place. So this is exactly what I'm going to do. So I have a normal pipeline. It's very simple. It's just printing a small message, and I'm going to leave the defaults here. So it's going to run in the Codefresh cloud. Here there is a message. I'm running in Codefresh SaaS, and if I go to settings, you can see I haven't done anything special here. It's running on the public cloud. But I have a pipeline which I'm going to run locally on my laptop. And this one is actually using the Codefresh CLI to trigger the other one. So the Codefresh CLI can also be used within Codefresh pipelines themselves. It's a bit like Inception. And you can use it to trigger another pipeline in a normal way. You don't actually trigger it with a webhook or you check out something, you just say, please run it. So the first pipeline is going to run on my cloud, on my laptop, and then when it's finished, it will actually launch another pipeline which is running on the public cloud. So again, we go back to the idea that you can mix and match pipelines that are running in different locations and with different security requirements, where all of them can be linked together and create the exact workflow that you want to create by mixing locations and security requirements. So I'm going to run it. One thing to notice here, if you remember, you said that the runner is fully automated. So you can see it's responsible not only for launching the needed components, but also for cleaning up. So you can see, for example, here, the engine is actually running while my pipeline is also running. But once my pipeline has finished, after a while, the engine is not needed. So the Codefresh runner will notice this and will clean it up automatically. So you get the scalability that you expect from a Kubernetes application, where you can launch things on demand and not set up resources beforehand.
Now, there's actually something architecturally pretty intelligent about the way that this functions, because normally keeping your CI/CD up to date is quite the challenge, and especially with someone like Codefresh, we release dozens of times per day, right? And the way that this runner is designed is it basically gets the components fresh when it runs, and so you don't really have to worry about updating it too much, as opposed to the kind of alternative old school ways of doing CI/CD, where oftentimes those things are only updated every couple of months. They get out of date. They have security vulnerabilities, and they're not easy to update. This is the total opposite. The runner essentially will bring in the components that it needs from latest, and so we did a release today. It's using those components inside the pipeline here.
Yes, so as you can see here, this is the pipeline that is actually running on my laptop. But if you look at the error messages, it's actually showing the error message from the other pipeline that is running on the SaaS. So I have linked both pipelines, one running on my laptop, one running on the cloud, and both of them are working together. And if I go also back to my builds, I will see just both of them launched in the same manner. So coming back to the previous point, in the UI, you don't really care about where its pipeline is running. All you get is a consistent experience where you're happy to run any pipeline on any location, and it will just work without any special settings. You don't need to do some special configuration to say, okay, this pipeline now is running in hybrid mode or not in hybrid mode. So that was the last demo. And this concludes actually the demo. So today we have talked about hybrid CI/CD. We have seen how easy it is to install a Codefresh runner on your own Kubernetes cluster. I just did it with one command, and it's actually the same for all Kubernetes clusters. You can install it on an AWS cluster, a Google cluster, an Azure cluster. We use the standard Kubernetes API, so there is nothing magic going there. The runner itself is also open source, so you can look at it if you have any questions regarding its security. You don't need to open any firewall ports in your infrastructure, so you will love this feature if you are an administrator. It will just work as the communication is always outgoing. The runner is actually talking to the Codefresh UI, and it's asking for jobs, not the other way around. You can install as many runners as you want in different environments, and then select each pipeline. Select its environment for each pipeline, and you decide specifically the environment where each pipeline is running. And it's very easy to mix and match. So you have multiple pipelines that are running in different environments, connect them together, and get a completely different workflow depending on your needs. You have seen how easy it is to change the environment that the pipeline is running. So maybe I have a pipeline that I'm running it the first time in the public cloud, and then I decide I need to run it on another location. And for all this, you get access to the same Codefresh UI, where all pipelines, regardless of the way they run, if they are hybrid or not, are still showing as in the same way. So as a developer, if you don't care really about the underlying infrastructure, you get a consistent experience where all your pipelines are behaving in exactly the same manner. questions.
All right, great. Sorry, Dan, did you want to say anything?
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I noticed there were a few questions as we went through. The first one I wanted to answer was from Brian. He asked if hybrid mode is available on Azure, AWS, and Google. The answer is yes. I mean, it's really any Kubernetes cluster. You just saw when Kostas installed it on his Docker for desktop. You could have it installed on a set of Raspberry Pis in a basement. You could have it installed on an oil rig or on in a cluster in the back of a restaurant. It really works in any Kubernetes environment. And so it's got tons of flexibility in that regard. I also see a question if these slides are going to be shared, and the answer is yes, they will be shared. So you'll get a copy of these slides.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, so if you have a question for Kostas or for Dan, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel. Obviously, we've answered a couple questions so far, but we have plenty of time if you have a question. I do have a question. Go ahead.
I was going to mention, if you do want to try this, you can just go to codefresh.io, and on the homepage, you can actually just scroll down and you'll see an option for Codefresh Runner. Just click that and go through the instructions. And you saw how quick it is to set up because we do have that command line utility that we provide. So it's very easy to get it deployed into any cluster, so you can start trying it out. And we see that there is a real demand for this because the different environments that organizations are running under, the different networks that they need to move across, the different locations, the different clusters, the different architectures they need to support. We found that it's been a very common and popular issue to deal with, especially as people are mixing and matching both cloud and on-prem solutions. We all thought that, I think when Kubernetes first launched, there was a big feeling like, oh, okay, this is what's going to finally get the people that are on-prem to move on to the cloud. And to some degree that's happening, but we're also seeing the cloud come on-prem. And that's a Kubernetes cluster sitting in the back of a McDonald's, you know, I mean, and running all of the store, all of the infrastructure for that store, having a way to manage and deploy to all of those different clusters and all their varying environments without having to worry about all the networking, without having to open up ports. It saves a ton of time and really removes a lot of the management headache that comes with CI/CD. So I don't see any other questions here. Maybe we'll give 10 more seconds for that.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and give the audience a minute to go ahead and get any last minute questions that they might have. While we're waiting, I can go ahead and do the drawing for our $350 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and do that. Our first gift card winner is, oh, wait a minute. We just got a question come in. So hold that thought on the gift cards, guys. We do have a question that came in. It says, actually, we use Jira for our code and other. Is there a way to connect Codefresh to a process that when done the development and need to compile machine and upgrade the cluster?
Yes, so we actually do also have a Jira step at steps.codefresh.io. You can see the Jira plugin. Looks like some people say they're not able to hear. I don't know what to do about that. But in this case, you're asking if Codefresh can connect to that Jira instance that's probably on-prem. The answer is yeah, I would go through the runner here. And then when it's done, you could have it create a machine and upgrade a cluster. You could certainly do that using Codefresh. You would just need to have you just need to have a step in your pipeline to execute something like that. So yeah, I would think that that's something that would be easily taken care of.
All right.
Yeah, all right, go ahead, drawing.
Cool. All right, we'll do the drawing, and then if another question comes in, then we'll go ahead and get to that. First winner is Andre Yang. Congratulations, Andre. Our second winner is Tat Lam. Congratulations, Tat. And our final winner today is, I know I'm going to mess up this name, Orest Kihevka. Congratulations, Orest. And I hope you guys enjoy your $50 Amazon gift cards. And it doesn't look like we've gotten any more questions in. So
I would just say as our final word, go to codefresh.io, try it out, hit us up on the site. You can request a demo. You can ping us there. There's a little chat you can use. There are no bots in there. Or hit us up on Twitter, just at Codefresh. Thank you.
All right, great. I do want to remind the audience real quick that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to listen to it again, you will be able to do that. We are going to be sending out an email after today's webinar that includes a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always go there and check it out. Just go to the webinars section, click on demand, and it should be right there waiting for you. And while you're there, hopefully there's, take a look around, see if there's any other webinars out there that pique your interest. With that, I guess I just want to thank Kostas and Dan for giving such a great presentation. I know the audience got a lot out of it, and judging from the questions that came in. So thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. Also want to thank the audience today for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.